Welcome back to Studio 5. Okay, have you ever heard a couple phrases I want you to ask yourself if you've heard? I just can't please you. Or nothing is good enough, whether it comes from your teenager or your spouse. It's a hard accusation to argue, but could they have a point?
You know, the problem is you want to set the bar high for your family and for yourself, but when are those high expectations simply just out of reach? Well, Studio 5 relationship coach Matt Townsend here to tell us how to manage those expectations.
Yes, you must manage them. They must be managed. Isn't it? I honestly found the biggest deal in a relationship is that gap. That problem between what I think you should do and what you do. And if you don't get on that gap, it tends to grow, have you noticed? Now, how many times have you just been so overwhelmed and pleased by what your partner was doing? Or how many times have you...
Are you looking for real answers here?
No, that's a hypothetical.
Okay, just
because your eyes rolled back in your head.
I know.
That was seriously awkward. Man, I was like, you're having a seizure. So there's 3 tools we're going to go over, okay? Because this gap's a big deal. Okay, so the first rule is called mind the gap. Have you ever heard that phrase?
Mind the gap?
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap?
Mind the gap.
I haven't heard that. Is that an old person's phrase?
If you go to England, London, in London they have the tube, the train.
Subway kind of thing, yeah.
And there's always signs everywhere that says mind the gap. The gap is the gap between the platform and the train. There's a gap. Mind it. If it's a big gap, you could have a big death. If there's a little gap, it's fine, but mind it. Pay attention to it. So what I want people to start doing is mind the gap between what they expect and the delivery. Here's my belief. If you expect a lot and they deliver a little, that gap causes pain. The pain that you have in your relationships, it's about the gap. So the key is you must mind this space. The bigger the space, the more the pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the top has to come down or the bottom has to come up,
Well, think about it. Well, what we usually want to do is we're not going to lower our expectation because our expectation's just right.
Yeah.
They're just messed up. So they need to pick up their game. And we believe if they would just pick up their game, we'd narrow the gap and we'd have less pain. The problem is most of us notice that they don't actually end up picking up their game. So we just stay with pain.
But there's a lot of contention that comes around trying to get them.
And where do we think the contention is?
We blame it on the person most likely.
Because you're not picking up your game.
Yeah.
But the reality is the gap is inside of us. We have the gap. The expectation and the non-delivery is inside of us.
So are you saying lower the expectation?
I'm saying you got 2 choices. Lower it, and we'll talk about that. Get real about it.
Sure.
Or get them to pick it up. And the reality is both are really difficult. Okay? Because we don't think we should lower an expectation. Because there's some things we cannot lower, right? So we'll talk about that. Okay? Rule number 1, mind the gap. I want you to know that because that's where your pain lies. Your pain does not lie in them. It lies in what you expect and what they deliver. That's painful, okay? The second key, though, would be inspect what you expect. I want you to honestly look at what your expectations are, okay? We're going to run through 5 keys to things you should look for. First thing to look for is your expectation consistent? Do you expect it every day, every week, day in and day out? Because a lot of times you'll find out that it's not. Do you change your expectations? Do the people around you have a hard time knowing what you want today versus what you wanted yesterday? Do you sometimes in the school year let your kids do certain things and then you don't let them do it during the summer, you don't worry about it? If that expectation's changing, it's not consistent. Okay? Number 2, is it achievable? This is a big one because a lot of wives, for example, may expect their husband to be able to come home and want to talk attentively for 4 hours. Is it really achievable? If it's not a real achievable thing, you might want to look at managing your expectation a little bit more. How about that he just comes home and he keeps his clothes on and he helps around the house and he talks for 10 minutes? Instead of getting in his boxers or whatever and watching TV all night. Right, Darren? I'm not saying anything. I just have heard. So we have to manage our expectations.
Darren,
well, like no one would have expected you to flip soap all over everybody.
Bring me out a fly swatter. I'm getting to this again.
Expectations.
We're going to pull the hat and a fly swatter in just a second.
So are they achievable and are they fair? Do you expect to have to live the same expectations I do? Or is it just me that has to be home and have dinner ready, and then when I go, and then my wife doesn't need to have that same expectation?
The fair expectation, is that something you really can fairly ask yourself?
Yeah. Is this something you would hold yourself accountable to?
Do you think people can answer that, honestly?
Well, it's interesting, yeah. Well, here's why, because would you switch the deal? When I was a mediator, somebody would say, I want the deal to go like this, and then my rule for fairness was, then let's just switch it. If it's fair for you to have it this way, let's just switch the deal the opposite way. And it should be fair for both. If it's not a deal you'll switch, then it's probably not a real fair expectation. Expectations need to be fair or at least mutually beneficial. We need to all be benefiting from it, right? The next one is universal, meaning is this an expectation that you could basically expect everyone else around you to also believe and buy into? Like I had a client whose wife or husband expected her to be home whenever he was home. Okay, high expectation. When I am home, you will be home. Period. And she went and checked with all of her friends, and all of her friends says, well, that's kind of messed up. So that's not a fair expectation. If your expectation...
Is that okay, like, to take little polls, like ask people around and find out?
There's some expectations, that, like, could you expect intimacy 4 times a day, every day of the week? Well, you can expect whatever you want. But the reality is the delivery.
And that's why I kind of asked about the fair question, because I think if you're the person with high expectations and you're feeling this pain, this gap in your relationship, sometimes I don't know if you can fairly assess how realistic your expectations are.
Which might be a great thing to take around to other people. But take it around to people that you all agree. Go to a family dinner and talk to everybody, and just, like, don't throw your partner under the bus, but say, what do you guys feel about this? And just throw ideas out, okay? And then the last one is what? Do you know? I'm dying. Rational. Is it a rational expectation? Or is it an expectation that just is coming from your biggest fear? Is this something that is so scary for you that it's an irrational behavior, and you're now just trying to have everyone else live up to your irrational life? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's something extreme. It's something that really shouldn't be happening except for the fact that you have a major fear.
So we're minding the gap. We're being realistic, answering those questions about our expectations, and then what?
And then there are some expectations. Every time I ask somebody to manage their expectations, they always say, well, what if you can't lower your expectations? What if I cannot lower this idea? Like an example of an expectation you shouldn't have to lower would be fidelity. I would expect my partner to be faithful, 100%. That's a pretty fair, reasonable, realistic, universal, achievable expectation. What if I can't lower that and my partner isn't 100% faithful? Am I just supposed to lower? Okay, then you're good at 60%. Give me 60% of your fidelity. We can't lower it, can we? So then what do you do? That's the point. 3 keys to what you do in that moment. And this is a little bit harder because at some point, one of the first rules is don't just live your life by one principle. Okay? You can. So my goal is, instead of lowering your expectation, keep your expectation where it is, but broaden it. So instead of making a linear line that's like this, make it a big, fat expectation.
What does that mean?
So broaden means, the one way you're going to close the gap is by increasing what your expectation actually is. It's not just a principle of fidelity. There's other principles you believe in, like compassion and honesty and hard work and integrity. And you can actually start to broaden your view of your partner by having more than just measuring them by one expectation.
So you're kind of redefining your understanding of what that is.
And it doesn't mean you need to then still stay with the person if they can't be faithful, but it's seeing that they are still a good person in a variety of ways, and they fall short in this one area. It's also using your other principles that you believe in, like compassion, forgiveness, mercy, long-suffering, meekness, humility. All of these can add to the breadth of your expectation. If I understand that I'm dealing with somebody that has a past trauma in their life and they're having a hard time being in the relationship, then I need mercy. So I can expect fidelity, and I can be merciful, and that'll broaden my expectation, which will lower my pain.
Great ideas and ways to mind that gap and have everybody be happier. Speaking of being happy, you got a date night coming up in St. George. You're going south.
So Southerners, we're coming down. We're coming down to party. It's the 7 Basic Needs Date Night, Friday, July 29th, 2011. This time it's $50 a couple, but we're having a big dinner. So if you're in St. George or anywhere in southern Utah, Washington County, anywhere down there, get there. Go to our website, matttownsend.com. Look it up. We're going to party hard.
Very fun. Very fun.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Can't miss that.